You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 8th of April 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up, Brussels takes tough action on tariffs.
We will focus like a laser beam on the 83% of global trade that is beyond the United States. Vast opportunities.
The EU reacts to tariff threats from the United States, and its treatment of tech giants could be the key. We'll have more. Also ahead in the next 60 minutes, the Dominican Republic tightens border controls with Haiti, blocking the exit for thousands trying to flee violence. We'll ask why and find out what happens next. Plus,
engines full power and liftoff. Go Falcon, go Starlink.
But could Elon Musk's and Starlink's dominance of the skies be challenged by Amazon? We'll have the latest as it prepares to send its satellites into space. We'll also head to a pet industry trade fair in Japan, plus a visit to Salone del Mobile and the newspapers too. That's all coming up on The Globalist, live from London. First, a quick look at what else is happening in today's news. China has said it won't back down in the face of threats by President Trump to place additional tariffs on imports. Meanwhile, President Trump has announced that the US has begun direct talks with Iran about its nuclear program. Iran says communication is indirect. And Taiwan has accused China of using artificial intelligence to increase disinformation in order to divide the Taiwanese public. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, Brussels wants to avoid a trade war with the United States. It is prioritising negotiations with the Trump administration over tariffs, and zero for zero duty is the offer on the table from the EU. But it is under no illusion that it may need to retaliate, and it believes that its relationship with US tech giants may be key to all of this. Well, I'm joined now by Mark Scott, Senior Resident Fellow at the Digital Forensics Research Lab at the Atlantic Council and former Chief Technology Correspondent for Politico, and here in the studio by Monocle Senior News Editor Chris Chermak. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Mark, if I may begin with you, explain to us just what the relationship between the European Union and American tech giants currently is. It's not straightforward, is it?
No, good morning, Emma. It certainly is not. As just like here in the UK, European citizens use Amazon, Apple, Google, like everyone else. They are dominant global services for a reason, because frankly, they are the best in the world. The problem is, over the last, say, decade, European regulators in particular have been saying, well, okay, you can be popular, but are you abusing your position to squeeze out rivals, both European and international ones? And so what we've seen over the last 10 years is a variety of measures, primarily in the regulatory space, to say, okay, fine, say Google, Apple, you can be popular, but you can't abuse that dominance going forward. And therefore, there's been a series of cases to limit or curb the power or expansion of these US tech companies, which for various administrations, both Republican and Democratic, have been seen as protectionist by the Europeans. And that's caused growing tension between Brussels and Washington.
So in that context, Chris, how likely is it that the European Union is going to start to focus on tech companies as retaliation were that to happen?
Well, this is the question, isn't it? And Mark can talk specifically about sort of these technical sides of what might be done. What we saw yesterday from the European Union was a focus actually not on that. They focused on this zero for zero proposal, which was about industrial policies. They wanted to reduce industrial tariffs to zero. And they didn't really talk that much about services and the tech stuff at the moment, because I think they're holding their fire on that. But that's what could be coming, because Donald Trump has already reacted to the European Union's proposal. He said it was not enough. He wants them to import more energy. the European Union has already offered to import more energy, particularly natural gas, from the US. That has gotten them nowhere. So at the moment, the talks between the EU and DC certainly seem like they are at a standstill, which means the question is what comes next.
And so, Mark, let's go back to you and find out what comes next. What are the options available to the European Union when it comes to targeting the tech giants?
There are a variety, but before we get into the options, we must remember, and this sounds like a silly thing to say, but the European Union is not a country. There are 27 countries, all with different interests. And what we're finding, particularly when it comes to targeting the US tech giants, there are countries like Ireland and Luxembourg, who are home to many of these US companies within Europe, who do not want to get too antagonistic, whereas those, say, in France, are more willing to sort of go to the mattresses, if you will, to take on the big tech giants. So there's inter-European rivalry about how far to go. But in terms of the options, as you say, Emma, there are kind of three buckets. One is to use existing European Union regulation, the so-called Digital Services Act, which focuses on online safety, and the Digital Markets Act, which focuses on digital competition in particular, to really target and force greater fines and remedies out of the US tech companies. I personally don't see that as really a realistic option, mostly because regulation isn't built for tariffs. They are two very different things. And the European Union over the years has not been willing to mix its regulatory regime with its tariff regime. Those are two quite separate different things. And the other one, before we move back to Chris, is something called the anti-coercion instrument. Now, I can understand your listeners maybe sort of this early in the morning sort of falling asleep over that, but it is quite important. It is a never used instrument the European Union has to really push back against any type of coercion from third-party countries, including the US. And they could use that, and must stress this is they could at this point use that to impose digital levies on US cloud services like Microsoft. They could stop US companies from bidding from very lucrative European Union public tenders for, say, health services. And in the worst case scenario, they could potentially block US services, say, like Google Play's App Store, from accessing the European Union market.
You're staying with you, Mark. Your previous stable of Politico has described that as the nuclear option, and it would, but from what you describe, cause as much damage to the European Union as it was to the States.
100%. And that's why I think, as Chris mentioned, we haven't seen Ursula von der Leyen take this step yet. I don't think the European Union have a variety of instruments, but they are also quite conservative with a small c. And what we have seen in previous iterations of tariff wars, and I agree this is sort of a new era of tariffs compared to what we've seen in the past, they focus primarily on goods because it's something that the trade experts in Brussels understand well. So I think in this first round of tariff pushback against Washington, we'll focus on bourbon and cotton and soybeans and things that we've seen in the past. And they'll leave the digital stuff for the nuclear option. And as I mentioned before, the European Union is very much divided on how far to go against big tech. Those who don't have big tech companies headquartered in their countries, say France or Germany, they may be more willing to sort of tax data or, impose restrictions. Whereas if you're an Ireland or Luxembourg who are heavily reliant on US tech companies for national revenue per taxes, you are very reticent to go and limit those companies' ability to operate within the 27 country bloc.
The European Union, Chris, has a problem here. Well, as Mark has mentioned, it has the internal problem of being united when 27 member states have different regional interests. But the way that the European Union goes about things is fundamentally different to the way that the Trump regime operates here, isn't it? You see the fact that the European Union likes things like proportionality. It likes to reason. It likes to have compromise. These are things that just do not exist within Donald Trump's sphere.
It's not just the fact that the European Union likes proportionality. I think it's the fact that, to your point, as you were just discussing with Mark, about what kind of impact these tariffs will have, the European Union is well aware that any retaliatory measures it takes will hurt the European economy itself. So this is a key reason why Ursula von der Leyen is trying to say, let's talk about this to Donald Trump. The problem is, though, as you say, Donald Trump has not so far shown himself really open to talking, at least not in terms of sort of ways that frankly make sense with what he has enacted so far, because the money of the tariffs that he has enacted for a lot of countries, not just the European Union, are not really based on the traditional, this idea of reciprocal tariffs. They're not based on what those countries have done to the United States. They're more just based on what the trade balance looks like. Are more goods being imported or exported? What that he wants to redress that trade balance. But that can also be just because a country is good at producing certain things, and so it's sending it to the United States. It doesn't necessarily have to do with tariffs. And this is the position that other countries are finding themselves in, as well as the European Union. Ursula von der Leyen can say, okay, let's talk. We'll reduce industrial tariffs to nothing. But this isn't what Donald Trump wants. He wants them to simply buy American stuff so that this trade balance is ended.
And we are seeing, staying with you, Chris, the idea that actually the European Union comes from a position at a slight disadvantage, doesn't it? Because Brussels has less to target than Washington, given that EU goods imports from the US are less than EU exports to the US. And you also have the line a couple of weeks ago, as we saw on that Signal chat, in advance of the charting of the targeting of Houthi rebels. We had the likes of Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth saying that they are not a fan of Europe. They feel as if Europe is in debt to them.
No, and they feel like they are tired of paying for Europe when it comes to defense specifically. And yes, when it comes to the tariffs, when it comes to goods, this goes to the point, of course, with Mark as well. When it comes to goods, yes, that is a drop in the ocean. That is where the European Union is at a negative. It does not import or export as much to the United States. But this is, of course, why this big question about services, that is the big one. That is the one where the European Union could really say, we're going to negotiate, we're going to show our strength to Trump by punishing what he is doing to the European Union, except for the fact that if they don't feel like there's any negotiation going to happen, they would simply be punishing their own economies.
Mark, do you think at the end of the day that the European Union will be prepared to pull the trigger on this, given the fact that they do everything that they can to avoid it?
I've been thinking about this a lot over the last sort of week. I'm not sure if Trump is playing chess and the European Union and Ursula von der Leyen are playing checkers or the other way around, but it does feel like they are speaking two different languages. And the European Union, and particularly when it comes to trade policy, is both aggressive, but also, as I mentioned before, conservative with a small c. It's really not traditionally known for going and taking big swings in new areas of trade policy. It takes a procedural, methodological, step-by-step process. If they do escalate into services, it will be going from 0 to 100 within months. That has never happened before. We are in uncharted territory. So if they do move into services, and I would also add, along with big tech, financial services like JP Morgan as an area where they would probably target, that would involve both a complete step change in European Union trade policy, but more importantly, politically, a massive change in how the European Union and the European Commission works. And I'm skeptical, at least this year, despite all the rhetoric we're seeing coming out of the White House, they are able or willing to take that step.
Mark Scott and Chris Cermak, thank you both for joining me on The Globalist. 2:13 a.m. in Santo Domingo, 7:13 a.m. here in London. People trying to flee the violence in Haiti have been met with tighter controls at the border with the neighbouring Dominican Republic. The Dominican president has announced more than a dozen measures to crack down on migrants who are trying to get into the Dominican Republic illegally as Haitians flee a surge in gang violence. Well, to tell us more, I'm joined now by Chris Sabatini, Senior Fellow for Latin America at Chatham House. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Emma.
So the president has announced more than a dozen measures. Could you outline what they are, please?
Well, first of all, they're going to continue building a wall along the border. The border is about 300 kilometers long, and they eventually hope to extend the wall along the entire border. Right now, it's only about 30 kilometers, but they want to add more. The second is they're going to add more troops. They already have about 9,000 troops there protecting the border. They want to add another 1,500 or so, which would signify a real buildup along the border. But also they're repatriating about 10,000 or trying to 10,000 Haitians a day back to Haiti, which is a problem because at the same time the United States and the Trump administration is sending back or threatening to send back about 250,000 Haitians through suspending temporary protected status, TPS. So they're sending them back into what is basically a civil war.
And what has led the Dominican Republic's president to do this? I mean, what has been the tipping point here in a long-running problem?
Well, as you say, first of all, it's a long-running problem. Tensions between the two countries have been long-standing. There was a famous incident decades ago called the Parsley Incident, where they rounded up and asked to try to identify Haitians. They asked them to say the word parsley in Spanish, and if they said it with a French accent, they would be rounded up, and many were killed, led to tens of thousands of deaths, murders. And then another time they repatriated even Haitians who've been born, or Haitian Dominicans who had been born in the Dominican Republic, sent them back. So there's been a long-standing issue of racism and difficult and even inhumane immigration policies. But in this case, Haiti right now is in the midst of basically a collapsed state, verging on becoming a criminal state. The gangs control about 90% of the capital. More than 1 million people have been displaced. It has become a group of 9 gangs now have formed a coalition. They govern the country. A transitional presidential council has really failed to govern effectively, and there's been no effective international intervention to control the situation. So it's become a hotbed of crime. More than 5,600 people were killed last year by gangs. So it's a dire situation. It's just across the border, and they fear that this criminality is going to seep over the border.
Is the Dominican Republic allowed to do this, however? Because with what you describe and the idea of sending people back to what is effectively a criminal state, people are saying that this is an abuse of human rights, and deportations must be halted as a result of this.
That's exactly right. This requires a larger international response. I'm not defending the Dominican Republic's long-standing abuse of Haitians, but what is happening just across the border is truly troubling for any country, especially for one that has had this prejudice against Haitians for literally centuries now. But yes, to send them back in this situation is positively inhumane. But unfortunately, despite an effort in the UN to create a UN peacekeeping mission in 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, Russia and China blocked that in the UN Security Council. So all the UN can do right now is they've managed to get fewer than 1,000 Kenyan police forces in the country, which is severely insufficient. And there's been no other response to the crisis. And so it's really effectively just the Dominican Republic that's left on an island that half of which, or more than half of which, is in the midst of a criminal collapse.
You mentioned that the international community is powerless to do this. I mean, has there been a serious enough effort to intervene in Haiti to try to help? Various countries have had a go, haven't they? But we still have presence in Haiti of international figures. We have the UN political mission in Haiti. We have various international figures, but one wonders where a concerted solution may be found, or something just to calm things down.
That's exactly right. There's no momentum on this. The international community has preferred to walk away from it. The UN itself, even General Secretary Guterres, is very reluctant to tackle this, in part because of the complexity of the problem, but in part because of the history of the UN and past interventions in Haiti has not been a happy one. There were cases, of course, 2 previous interventions, both of which, when after the forces pulled out, Haiti continued a downward spiral. But also there is the case of UN troops first being accused of rape, and then also a cholera outbreak that led to the deaths of tens of thousands of Haitians as a result of Nepalese UN troops using an open latrine. So it's been a very difficult track record, and simply people just prefer to walk away.
Chris Sabatini, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. You're listening to The Globalist, and a little later, a major change in direction as we head to Japan. That is a prayer for pet health in Tokyo as Japan hosts the ultimate pet trade fair. All you ever needed to know about Interpets, where the best doggy smile and oldest companions win prizes. Stay tuned.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
Let's continue with today's newspapers. In the studio, Yossi Meckelberg, Senior Consulting Fellow at the Middle East and North Africa Programme at Chatham House. Good morning, Yossi. How's the Meckelberg world this morning?
It's good. I mean, personally, it's good. When you look at the papers, then you think, why do you wake up in the morning so early?
Always a question of context, because it's worth it, Yossi, and you know why. There's been such problems in the last few days, few weeks indeed, because of this the tariffs imposed by Donald Trump. You wanted to draw our attention to an article in the Financial Times which talks about how people are trying to get around this.
Yeah, because everyone is shocked by the tariffs, and it's like bidding. If 50% doesn't work, let's have 104%. And what do you do with this? Because people, they still need to sell, those who manufacture need to sell their commodities. So they'll start companies, according to the Financial Times, come with all sorts of creative ideas. So what is in the price of any item is not the real price of it. So you try to remove, for instance, the development of it or the promotion of it. So if something costs $100 or £100, it's not really £100. It's the original price of it before it goes through the intermediaries, before we do the advertisement or the promotion. So what happens to present the price of a much lower price, so it will be 70 and 80, and then 25% or 50% tariffs is a bit less. So then we don't have to, because at the end of the day, someone will have to pay for these tariffs. Either the manufacturers will have to swallow this bitter pill and won't translate it to the consumer, or at the end of the day, the consumer, or anything in between. So what you do is a bit of this and a bit of that. But I think we'll get more creative ideas. The more the Trump administration is creative, the more the response is going to be creative.
It's an excellent article because it gives the example of how this might work, how people might get around it. And it says an example of a spirit importer whose supplier not only sells them the drink, but also provides the advertising and promotional help. That works because there's a big gap in Trump's creativity, which is targeted things, stuff. But in actual fact, the service industry is something which is escaping this.
Exactly. And because it's a very... The idea here is generic. When we saw the formula, I thought at the beginning, when I look at the formula of the tariffs, something very, a lot of clever people look about what creates the gap between what the United States sells and what it buys. And I thought they found a kind of, I'm trying to be diplomatic, oversimplistic formula or to impose this tariff. But they didn't think through about the entire global economic structure. And as a result of it, the minute that, after the shock that came with the tariffs, people started to think, hey, it's not exactly what it says because we can go around this. And I think we'll see more and more of it. But at the end of the day, the consumers will decide, because the pressure by the consumer, when start to see the consequences of it, then the pressure will mount on the administration.
Let's move to another area of trouble which Donald Trump is wading in. The United States is having direct talks with Iran, says the White House. Tehran has said the talks are indirect. Is this Trump once again forcing a situation simply by announcing something?
It's one of the things, for better or for worse with Trump. he don't only thinks outside the box, he doesn't have a box. So whatever comes to his mind, I can think, but when I saw the pictures of Netanyahu sitting next to Trump yesterday, and Trump says about, we're going to have direct negotiations with Iran. Had it been Joe Biden or anyone, Netanyahu will jump and will probably brief people, no, we can't do that. It's, this will bring the end of the world, and Iran will develop nuclear weapons. And of course, because everyone got used to that, you need to pander to the president. He says nothing, and actually have to live with that, which is not a bad thing to have a direct negotiation with Iran. But at the same time, when Trump says that, if the negotiation not going to be successful, then we'll do the obvious. Now, the fact that he used the obvious as bombing Iran, this is a cause of worry, because there is a military build-up right now, either in the Indian Ocean or in the Middle East, or in both of them, B-52 bombers and the rest, with a real possibility that moving from possibility of negotiation to using military force. Now, we know that Iran is weak and comes to the negotiation table in a weak position compared to what was less than a year ago, less than 8 months ago. But at the same time, the use of military threat. But it's now on the table. Everything right now on the table. One just hope that Trump learned that the damage caused by withdrawing from the JCPOA back in 2018 and reach a new agreement.
What do we think that Trump wants from this, other than to say that he's won another thing?
Yeah, for Trump, it's all about, I say something, it must happen, and eventually to get the Nobel Peace Prize. But at the same time, he said he doesn't want wars. And under his administration, wars never happened, as was the case in the first Trump administration. But at the same time, he keeps threatening with using force. At one point or another, when you keep threatening, someone say, you know what, show your cards. And you will have to do that. And then there's going to be a war. And the last thing that anyone needs in the Middle East now is a war with Iran. So if it's kind of deterrence, bring to the negotiation table and reach an agreement, all right. But the question, people still believe that Trump is bluffing all the time, but there is nothing behind or beyond bluffing.
Let's move on to an article in the Times of Israel. We saw Benjamin Netanyahu being personally greeted by Donald Trump as he went into the White House yesterday. And you saw two men who, when you place them side by side, you can see that they are two men who will probably see eye to eye on so many ways of doing things absolutely their way, unequivocally, taking what they need and what they want, and also, dare I say it, possibly sharing some skincare tips along the way. But in the meantime, you have the likes of France, Jordan and Egypt, and this is the article in the Times of Israel, who are all actually trying to push Netanyahu and Trump on a ceasefire in Gaza. When you saw these two men at the back of the White House, you just thought, how useful is any of this pressure when they seem to be made from a different mould?
It makes it very, very difficult. Bear in mind that, this kind of meeting of minds didn't stop the United States from imposing 17% tariffs on Israel, despite Israel removing all tariffs from American goods, from U.S. goods. At the same time, what we see, and I think what I found interesting in this article, actually in this meeting in Cairo, that Europe gradually, some elements within Europe, some leaders in Europe assert themselves. We saw it with Ukraine, we see it with the tariffs, and now with Gaza. The idea that it's not the source of resolving issues internationally, not going to come from Washington. Europe and the Middle East, it's more important in a way to Europe and the Middle East because they are there to resolve the issue of Gaza. It also enter into the conversation, domestic political conversation in their own society. So it's important for them to present an alternative. And that's what we saw yesterday, I think, in Cairo. President Macron visited, met with President Sisi and King Abdullah of Jordan, and talking about an alternative plan, which Israel is objecting that the PA will take over Gaza eventually and govern it. Interestingly, Macron talked about Hamas not going to be ruling or part of the governing body in Gaza, and you didn't see any objection, either by the King of Jordan or the President of Egypt.
And how useful is the intervention by the European Union here, given the fact that, we look at Emmanuel Macron yesterday holding hands with, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi and King Abdullah of Jordan, wanting to be that counterweight to the United States. But it's just a couple of weeks ago that he was acting as the counterweight by embracing Volodymyr Zelensky. It suddenly does, Europe takes on a lot.
I think it's part of a process. We were here in Europe too long on the sidelines of international affairs, waiting for the United States to resolve all this conflict. And we see now with the Trump administration, it will make only the situation worse, whether it's Ukraine, a world economy, or in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There is no magic wand here for Europe to become, the peace broker in the region. But I think we see important steps forward that Europe takes responsibility because it's in European interest to resolve this conflict.
Yossi Mekelberg, thank you as ever for joining me in the studio. The time here in London is 7:30 a.m. You're listening to The Globalist with Emma Nelson. A look now at some of the other stories we're keeping an eye on today. China has said it won't back down in the face of threats by President Trump to place additional tariffs on imports. Beijing faces an almost 50% extra import duty if it fails to remove the retaliatory duties it's placed upon the US. Donald Trump's threat came as global stock markets experienced significant volatility in reaction to his tariff announcement. The president has dismissed suggestions that the tariffs could be paused. Meanwhile, President Trump has announced that the US has begun direct talks with Iran about its nuclear program. He was addressing reporters after meeting the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House. Iran says communication is indirect. And Taiwan has accused China of using artificial intelligence to increase disinformation in order to divide Taiwan's public. Taipei's Security Bureau says it's detected more than 500,000 pieces of controversial messages so far this year, mostly on Facebook and TikTok. And those are the headlines on The Globalist. Just nudging 7:32 here in London. Let's have a roundup of news from Ukraine and Central and Eastern Europe. Julia Lassiker is Monocle's writer and researcher, joins us in the studio. A very good morning, Julia. Good morning. Let us head to your country straight away, to Ukraine, and hear about an American woman called Victoria Spartz. Who is Victoria Spartz and why is she so dangerous for Kyiv?
So, Victoria Spartz is a Ukrainian-born American politician. So she's a representative and she serves with the Republican Party. So she came to the US when she was 22, so already, well on, into her life. Formed, I guess, you'd say you're formed in the country that you spend most of your early life in. So spent most of it in Ukraine. But then she became an American citizen in 2006. And I think she's been swept up in this sort of radicalization of the Republican Party because when she was first elected in 2021, the full-scale invasion broke out a year later, and she initially supported U.S. aid to Ukraine. She was a very staunch, supporter of her country, her home country. But then, since, the Republican Party has sort of turned against Ukraine, and we've seen this really radical shift in the Republican Party's mentality, she has become incredibly anti-Ukraine, very anti-Zelensky, very much saying that Zelensky should be removed. Zelensky is sort of bringing all the power under himself. And she voted against that huge... If we remember in 2024, there was that $60 billion Ukraine aid bill, which just couldn't make it through the Senate. And she said that it articulated a lack of clear strategy and there was a need for better oversight here. And she voted against it. And now she's saying that Ukraine should be giving up land to Russia.
And she has been challenged quite a lot of this. There's an article in The Telegraph which very eloquently describes just how much resistance she's coming up against, and she is refusing to back down. In fact, she's refusing to sit down either. She's appearing at countless town halls, making her views known, and she's been asked why she isn't supporting her own country, and she's saying, my number one job as an American congresswoman is to protect American interests.
Yeah, and I think it's a really poignant example for Ukraine because I guess when you have a country that isn't known about in the world, really, I mean, it came into everyone's consciousness in 2022 when the assault first happened. Ukraine has to look to its envoys around the world. Who are its sort of voices? And she is the only Ukrainian-born sort of member of the Senate, and so she should be the one sort of championing Ukrainian causes. What she's saying is she doesn't want to be boxed in by her Ukrainian heritage. She wants to be an American first. And so I think what we're seeing here is this really unpleasant sort of pivot away from the country that gives you, your early life. And of course, you don't have to swear allegiance to it and you don't have to sort of follow it on. But surely she should see the bigger picture in which how Ukraine is so vital to American interests and so vital to sort of American power around the world. And if America is to lose this sort of contest, I guess it is really, of overpower, over influence with Russia, how much American interests will suffer. And so I think it's a really interesting lesson for countries that, as I said, were less alone around the world. How do you sort of keep your sort of former citizens on board, keep allowing your message to be heard, allowing your story to be heard?
Let's move to Europe for another of your stories that you wanted to talk about, which is the upcoming Polish presidential elections. Poland moving from the Law and Justice Party a couple of years ago to a slightly more centrist and left-wing government under Prime Minister Donald Tusk. Above that, we have this battle for the presidency, which to all intents and purposes is going to be a right-wing position.
Well, it's not everything is decided yet. So I was at this very fascinating talk on Thursday with a leading Polish politician, and he was talking about how nothing is decided yet and basically how pivotal this presidential election is going to be in Poland. So it will decide basically who controls the Polish parliament, because whoever there are two leading candidates. We have Rafał Trzaskowski, who's the Warsaw mayor at the moment, and he's polling with Tusk, who's the current prime minister. And then we have his opponent from the PiS party, from the Law and Justice Party, which is much more right-wing, and that's Karol Nawrocki. And whoever wins, out of those two, they will decide whether Tusk basically has majority power in parliament to pass his reforms, etc. But we have this really this upstart politician who's kind of come from nowhere. And I think we're seeing a very similar situation as to Romania when they cancelled their presidential elections, because there they also had a candidate who sort of came out of nowhere. He was offering these really radical views. And it's funny, they all share the same views, don't they? They're very much anti-Ukraine. Sometimes they're even anti-America. They can't really decide whose side they're on. But then also very anti sort of liberal laws. So we have Sławomir Mencen, and he's the candidate of the Confederation Party. We might actually remember the Confederation Party because one of their representatives, Grzegorz Braun, he extinguished that Hanukkah menorah last year, and that was sort of made all the headlines all around the world because it was so horrific. Anyway, the good news is, though, that Mencen may have peaked too early, because last week he came out with these crazy views about, crazy to the Polish public, because now we've seen his support dropping, which are about abortion and very anti-Semitic views as well, very, very, very backward views. And luckily we're seeing that this is not palatable for the Polish public. And so he's sort of peaking too early. And it's funny, I guess it's when these very far-right presidential or candidates reveal what they actually think, and then people sort of reconsider.
Finally, let's touch very briefly, if you don't mind, Julia, on the fact that the Vatican can't get involved in politics, although we have seen Pope Francis demonstrate in words, not deeds, help for Ukraine. It's now stepped up a bit more because the Vatican is sending ambulances.
Yes, so this is a story I really wanted to talk about, because the Vatican has, or the Pope Francis more accurately, has been really criticised for the way he's talking about Ukraine, the kind of messaging that he's putting out to Ukrainians, also about Russians, sort of embracing the two sides, bringing the two sides together. And Ukrainians are saying this is preemptive. We have to sort of see how the conflict goes, the war sort of turns out. But what he's doing, he's sending his special envoy, Cardinal Konrad Krajewski, who was actually appointed at the beginning of the full-scale invasion. He is sending him with 4 ambulances, and they're being donated to Ukraine. He's driving them. Krajewski is driving them to Ukraine, and they have been bought with the help of US Catholics. So this is a very special mission, and they're bearing the coat of arms of the Vatican City State, and they're on their way to Ukraine now to be delivered to medics on the front line.
Julia Lessica, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. You're listening to The Globalist.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
7:39 here in London. Now, Elon Musk's Starlink satellite system is getting competition from the shape of Amazon's Kuiper system. The purpose of Project Kuiper is to increase the amount of broadband available throughout the world. And what it's calling a constellation of 3,000 satellites are being sent into low orbit around the Earth. Well, to tell us more, I'm joined now by David Whitehouse, space scientist and author. Good morning, David.
Good morning.
And this first batch of satellites goes up this week, doesn't it?
That's right. It should have gone today, but there's a few issues on the launch pad, and it's going up in 2 days. And it'll be a handful of operational satellites. This is the second launch for the Kuiper project. They launched 2 test satellites fairly recently, and they worked very well. So this is the first handful to make operational, to check out ground systems, to check out orbit placement. And as you say, this will be followed by eventually over 3,000 satellites in 5 launch phases, in 3 shells and in 98 planes of orbit around the Earth. So they're going to girdle the Earth so that theoretically, wherever you are, if you have a small dish, you can pick up broadband.
And this is the overall purpose of Amazon, is effectively to globally cover the world when it comes to connectivity.
Well, that's right. And Starlink, Amazon, as you said, is a competitor to Starlink. Starlink's been up now for a few years and is doing very well. But what Amazon hope to do with fewer satellites is actually take advantage of leaps of technology. Their antenna is very impressive. It allows for transmission and reception from these satellites. Very cheap, literally in both Starlink and Kuiper's case, it's literally just pointed up at the sky and you will get a feed, connect it to your router and you're on the internet. But it's not just the internet connection, although that is valuable. There are over 2 billion people in the world who have no chance of access to the internet. But it's also the information and the data, positioning data, usage data, all the ancillary data about where people are and what they're doing throughout the whole world, not just in the developed country, that is of great importance in the future.
So we now have 2 huge private sector players. We have Elon Musk and we have Amazon effectively controlling the world's reliance on the internet.
Well, that's right. There are a handful of smaller players coming in as well, but they're niche operators, and who knows how they're going to develop. But yes, you're quite right. You have 2 American billionaires, Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, who are behind the most efficient way to connect the whole world. And remember, as I said, this is billions and billions of people who will be new to the internet. Therefore, it'll be a new experience for them. There'll be new opportunities for them to explore, and actually new customers for their products. And this has alarmed people, particularly in China, who are planning a similar system of their own, but they're nowhere near as advanced as that. So there are pros and cons to this. One could say that you have 2 competing companies, so that is good. But people like China would say, well, actually, they're both American competing companies, so that's not good for us.
And we also have the likes of Ukraine, who saw Elon Musk cutting off satellite communications a while back, finding themselves, entirely dependent on the likes of Elon Musk. How precarious a situation does it create?
Well, theoretically, And in fact, as Elon Musk demonstrated, because these satellites communicate with ground stations and they're connected to the internet through those, you can turn the ground stations off. You can channel what information is available. You can channel what positional speed of access to the internet. All this is controllable to a specific dish or region of dishes on the ground. Sometimes it's due to the fact that the signal is overwhelmed, in the sense that there's no more capacity in a certain region. Sometimes you can switch it off and manipulate it that way. So customers are going to have to, big customers who deal with this, fleets, countries, shipping operators, they're going to have to deal a very specific contract with Elon Musk and with Kuiper, because this can be used politically. And there are, I suppose, instances where politicians could overrule Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos in the denial of operational service to certain people. That is a big worry for the future, because with this great opportunity comes power.
David, thank you so much as ever for joining us on Monocle Radio. That was David Whitehouse. You're listening to The Globalist. And we turn now to something for our furry friends on The Globalist. Interpets, the pet industry's biggest annual event for products and services, has been held in Japan this weekend. Monocle's Tokyo Bureau Chief Fiona Wilson was there for us and sent us this report.
Pets in Asia Pacific are already living better lives than many humans. One of the industry's leading trade shows, Interpets Asia Pacific, was held at Tokyo Big Sight over the weekend. The pet-related market in the Asia Pacific region is growing rapidly. Last year, Japan's pet care market alone was valued at around 11.76 billion euros, a 21% increase since 2019. The Asia Pacific market for pet food and other products is expected to hit 32 billion euros by 2029, up by a fifth in the space of just 5 years. This show was the largest ever, with 950 exhibitors and over 70,000 visitors across 4 days. Exhibitors came from Japan and overseas, from Hong Kong, South Korea, China and Canada, making it something of an expo for the pet care industry. Canadian pet food company Harrow shared their impressions of Interpets.
The whole Canada Pavilion, we organized that so that we could meet importers or distributors in Japan. So it's a trade mission from Canada. We're a few companies together, and the goal is to learn about the market and meet with distributors. The only impression is that people seem to be very enthusiastic about their pets, very passionate about their pets.
The exhibition's theme was enriched living for people and pets. From pet food made with local Japanese ingredients and organic food that both dogs and humans can enjoy, to pet fashion brands, travel goods and the latest technology in dog toilets, it had everything. There was even a booth from Jikein Temple in Tokyo offering prayers for pet health. This year's Interpets also featured 2 newly established zones, pet disaster prevention and pet tech. The pet disaster prevention area showcased useful items for evacuating with pets during disasters and offered hands-on evacuation experiences with pets. Pet tech introduced pet products and services using the latest technology. Korean tech company Pitta Peta provides genetic testing services for pets.
We are doing a DNA test for pets to evaluate the risk of the genetic diseases that the pets have. When it comes to long-term perspective, people should be aware of the importance of the breeding, actually. If the father dogs or mother dogs have some specific DNA, it could be crucial to their offsprings. So in terms of a long-term perspective, I expect more healthy life of the pets in the future when they are doing a DNA test.
With everything from healthcare to travel, furniture and fashion, the range of products designed specifically for our beloved pets looks set to grow in Asia.
And my thanks to Fiona Wilson and all the team out in Tokyo. You're listening to The Globalist. Finally, on today's programme, we head to Italy. Salone del Mobile is officially underway in Milan, and among Monocle's large team taking in the sights in the Italian city is Nick Moniz, Monocle's design editor. A very good morning to you, Nick. How's Milan looking?
Milan is superb, Emma Nelson. It's actually, just got a little glimpse of the Duomo, actually. I'm in the back of a cab with Grace Charlton, our associate editor. We are on our way to the fair. You're getting it live. Do you want some Atmos?
Seriously, I want to know. Okay, so as we go through this interview, we've got a good 5 minutes, 6 minutes to go through. I want you to sort of tell us where you're going to. Can you sort of satellite navigate us way through the streets of Milan? Okay. Where is your starting point now? Starting point now is literally we've just left our accommodation. I'm going to wind down the windows. There's a little bit of street Atmos for you. So we're in the car. There's a tram going by. This is lovely. We're heading actually first to a launch of a new product range by Object Supply. So we're going to grab a coffee there quickly. They're a design incubator based in Milan who work with creatives to basically partner them with craftspeople to make new products, which is really quite exciting. So we're going to go see that. But then we're heading to the big mama of them all, Salone del Mobile, which is the trade fair, and that's at the Rofiera trade fair grounds on the outskirts of the city. And it's there that I think there's something like 500 different brands displaying all their newest launches, everything from, there's Euroluce, so lighting, floor lamps, table lamps, through to sofas, through to, I don't know, there's other odd things that you tend to discover while you're there. Maybe some tile, I don't know. So that's what we're heading towards, and that's kind of like the anchor of the week. Excellent. And having someone broadcast live from the back of a moving taxi is always a good idea. What could possibly go wrong? Let's talk about Euroluce, and it's a first go at the Euroluce International Lighting Forum. So tell us about the focus of that a bit. So Euroluce, this actually takes place every 2 years. They kind of, it's a dedicated showcase within Salone del Mobile trade fair. So they basically bring all these lighting brands together, and they all, illuminate us with their new designs. So it alternates with the kitchen and bathrooms dedicated section. So this is the good one to go to, if I can be so upfront about it. I'd much rather look at some nice lamps than a toilet. That's not to say I can't get excited about a toilet, but basically, it's all these lighting brands coming together, and it truly is amazing. It's gorgeous. Everyone's puts a lot of effort into their displays. Obviously, with lights, there's a lot to play with in terms of creating atmosphere, which I really think helps to also demonstrate the product and what you're actually potentially buying if you're a developer or an architect and you're visiting the trade fair to kind of look for products to finish your project with. And this is an absolute beast of a fair, isn't it? I think there's more than 2,000 exhibitors. It is, the place that everybody goes to, and questions are asked every single year about how it keeps itself fresh and how it keeps itself relevant. But there are more than 150 first-time brands at Salone. Where are people gaining their sources of excitement? I think there's a few things that I really look forward to, and actually, it's how the fair stays relevant is actually also about moving beyond the fair itself. So, one, I can talk about the brands in a moment, but I think in terms of the relevancy thing, it's people want to be in the city. You kind of want to be running around Milan, catching those glimpses of the Duomo that I just had before, and the trade fair itself is leaning more and more into that. So on Sunday night when we got here, they had a big display in a Pinacoteca di Brera, which is a library, cultural institution, art gallery. They've got some amazing Caravaggios on display there. But they have put a massive installation called the Library of Light by Ez Devlin, an award-winning a set designer. And
about bringing people into the city, into these kind of spaces that they wouldn't otherwise go into. So they're doing an amazing job of that by I guess, kind of trying to demonstrate the power of good design and its ability to have a pull on people to physical spaces. In terms of brands that I'm excited about, I mean, there's a few things. There's also brands that are returning to Milan. So Marset, for instance, an amazing Spanish lighting brand, they're going to be at Euroluce for the first time in years. So I'm super excited to see what they have cooked up. Because again, this is where you see the new products. This is where you see the innovation. And I think that's what makes this so important. So Marset, I'm particularly excited about. We wrote a lovely story on them in our Salone del Mobile newspaper, which you can pick up on newsstands across the city, but also order online. So it's those sorts of moments of return. And then there's Salone Satellite, which is my favourite section of the trade fair. Actually, and Grace, who's with me, has got the brief to go and find the best new designers that are showing works there. So that's for people under 30. Who are creating under 35 rather, who are working in the furniture and design industry.
It's clearly busy where you are because we can hear the Uber driver getting another gig. Just explain to us a little bit more about Salone Satellite. This focus on youth, on younger designers. And that is an essential part of Salone, isn't it?
100%. I think this is the thing that maybe gets a little bit challenging. There's a tendency for, I guess, the big brands to completely dominate. They've got the money. You've also got fashion brands kind of muscling in as well. And they can put on these huge, extravagant displays, which makes it really, really difficult for smaller, younger brands and designers to compete. So Salone, 26 years ago now, carved out this section called Satellite, which is just a dedicated area of the trade floor for young designers to display works, and it kind of becomes a magnet. If you're just walking across, coming across a singular designer with maybe 2 or 3 pieces, you're less likely to stop. But if you're walking into what is essentially a forum of 50 designers presenting works, you're going to take a little bit more time to consider it and kind of work through it. I think there's also something nice about the compare and contrast, to kind of see people alongside their competition, for want of a better expression, and see how one designer stacks up against another. I think that's really important. But almost taking that Satellite model and moving beyond that, I think also often the best showcases are the more emerging brands presenting work in group settings. So there's another showcase called Convey, where a host of, I want to call them emerging brands, come together and present works. And that's something that I sort of always seek out, because that's where the excitement is, and that's where the people that are pushing boundaries and wanting to be noticed are often presenting.
Finally, Nick, in 30 seconds or less, you've been there since Sunday. Best parties so far, or have we all been going to bed after traipsing around?
No, I have not been going to bed, which is probably why I can feel a little tickle in my throat. But I think the best party so far was on Sunday night. Apartamento teamed up with Belmont and hosted this party in this super cool little bar. I wish I could tell you the name of it, but I can't, because I then finished the night at the Park Hyatt with a few more beverages and everything got a little bit blurry.
Nick Moniz, thank you so much for joining us on the line from a cab in Milan. And that's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all our producers, Hassan Anderson and Chris Chermak. Our researcher was Francesca Gilks, and our studio manager was Lily Austin, with editing assistance from Ryuma Takahashi. And the warmest of thanks to all my guests too. After the headlines, more music on the way. The briefing's live at midday here in London. Chris Chermak is your host for that. And The Globalist is back at the same time tomorrow. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening.